Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and today we're going to talk about the role of microtubules in plant tropism. You have probably seen a houseplant leaning towards a window or vines that are wrapping around a pole. In this case, it's wrapping around the window shade cord on the picture in the left. This may look like a plant is simply reacting to the world around them, but there's actually a menagerie of complex processes occurring inside of the plant at a cellular level, and all of that can start with tropisms. Tropisms are directional growth responses, meaning that part of a plant will grow towards or away from the stimulus in the surrounding environment. Environmental stimuli can include things from light, gravity, or touch from physical contact. And surprisingly, these large scale plant movements are powered by tiny dynamic structures inside of plant cells known as microtubules. We can see some here in the center of the slide. And what are microtubules? They are tiny protein tubes that are built from alpha and beta tubulin that are two types of globular proteins. These microtubules snap together into long chains and are part of the cell's skeleton known as the cytoskeleton. In plants, this isn't just structural, it's also functional by helping the plant to decide how or where it should grow. Each microtubule has a plus and a minus end, and they don't grow equally. The plus end will grow faster and is more active, and we can see that in the top of the image here, while the minus end is much more stable and it will undergo changes more slowly. These differences allow the microtubules to quickly reorganize themselves to respond to stimuli in their environments. So this might be when a plant senses that the direction of gravity has changed or the light source has shifted. The entire process is regulated by MAP. And these are actually microtubule associated proteins. They help to grow, shrink, and to anchor the microtubules. It is the MAPs that help the microtubules to rearrange when their environment goes through these shifts and these changes. This shifts the cytoskeleton so that it changes directions in the cellular growth and will allow the plant to bend, to reorient itself, or to move its leaves, and it can do all of this without any muscles. So even though the plant may appear like it's standing still on a macroscopic scale, on a microscopic one, it's more like a full-time construction zone. So let's start with the most common or recognized type of tropism, phototropism, which is the growth or response to light. In order for a plant to optimize photosynthetic processing, a plant will use microtubule mechanisms to direct its leaves and shoots towards the sunlight. In some plants, phototropism ensures that the roots have been driven away from the light. Plants need the sunlight to photosynthesize, so it would make sense that they would evolve a way to lean in when they find any of it. The light will hit one side of the plant, and that sets off a cascade of cellular signals. And a key player here is the plant hormone auxin. Auxin is able to redistribute itself away from the light source. So in the picture on the left, all the little colorful beads at the bottom of the beaker have moved away from the light source to the right. This might sound like it's backwards, but the trick is that auxin will cause the cell on the shaded side of the plant to elongate, and this will bend the plant towards the light. So how are the microtubules involved? Auxin will also change the orientation of the microtubules in the plant cells. These microtubules act like tracks, helping the cell build its wall in a specific orientation. When the auxin floods to one side, it triggers the realignment of microtubules there, and that tells the cell how to expand and will ultimately cause the plant to bend. This isn't so different from a construction crew getting new blueprints halfway through a project and saying, nope, we're going this way now. So what is the end result of this change in plant architecture? It can lead to a graceful arc towards the light source. We can see on the image to the right side in the center, there's some fluorescent microscopy, and and we can actually see the orientation of the microtubules, and most of them are horizontal here, but you can see some of them shifting to become vertical towards the top. So you might think that plants are particularly perceptive now. And thanks to Winslow Briggs, we know that plants are actually pros at sensing their environment. This especially is true when it comes to light. Briggs's research spent decades digging into how photoreceptors work in plants, specifically the model organism Arabidopsis thaliana, and how it responds to light. He uncovered that there's one key to the puzzle here, and that would be the blue light receptors, which we can see in the image on the left. And these are known as phototropins. They are responsible for mediating the phototropin mechanism in the plant and what causes the bending of the coleoptile in the plant. So this wasn't just like a cool discovery that he made and he printed it in a journal or a book to be peer reviewed. His research had real world applications, and those were actually quickly used by farmers. It allowed the farmers to improve their yields by changing the plant spacing and increasing how much light each leaf on the plant was able to receive. The next type of tropism we will talk about is gravitropism. Plants may seem to be rooted into place, but they can still determine which way is up and which way is down. This ability to grow in response to gravity is what's known as gravitropism, and it kicks in as soon as the seed begins to sprout. It turns out that gravity is detected by specialized cells at the root cap. And the image of the root on the right, we can see the root cap actually at the tip or the very end, the very bottom of the root. This is like a little helmet at the end of each growing root. And within these cells are tiny, dense organelles known as amyoplasts. And these amyoplasts are packed full of starch. That starch makes them heavier than the other structures. And that causes them to sink in response to gravity. So much like a slow motion snow globe, all of these amyoplasts will move towards the bottom. And once they settle, they can trigger a chain of signals that tell the plant, hey, the gravity is down here. This signal also changes the flow of auxin, so the same hormone that we met in phototropism. But here, high concentrations of auxins have a different effect depending on the tissue. In roots, it will inhibit the elongation of cells. So when auxin accumulates on the lower side of the root, it slows down the growth on that side. On the upper side of the root, it will continue to expand and cause the root to bend downwards. And we can see that on the images on the right. So what does this directional bending involve? You might have also guessed that it involves microtubules. And just like with phototropism, auxin will trigger the reorientation of microtubules, helping the plant to rearrange its cell walls in a new direction. This results in a directional bend that is shaped by the microscopic changes inside of the cell. This doesn't just matter for seedlings. So if a tree is damaged in a storm and it falls over or starts to be knocked over, its roots and shoots will often curve back down, and part of the trunk or the branches may become more vertical over time. And all of that is thanks to a built-in gravity sensing system. But what would happen if there's no gravity? This could happen or be a scenario on the International Space Station. The plants in space often end up being very, very confused as to which direction to grow. These amyoplasts cannot correctly sink down to the lower side without some type of gravity acting on them. So at the University of Florida, two plant biologists, Annalisa Paul and Robert Furl, studied the effects of microgravity to learn more about the microtubules and about auxin and how that affects the response in the root tips. This does allow for the auxin and the amyoplast to work as intended, but the process is not perfect, and we can kind of see that in the picture here. Even though the plants on the bottom have been exposed to microgravity, They're still growing in a much more irregular fashion than those that would be grown here on Earth with the expected amount of gravity. So continued research and having a better understanding of the impacts on plants will lead to the ability to cultivate sustainable food for long-term missions in space. And our third type of tropism is thingmatropism. It's the plant's response to physical touch or contact, and usually this is going to be found in non-woody plants. So a couple examples. First, we might have seen this action take place in the Mimosa pudica, better known as the touch-me-not plant. And within seconds of tapping onto the leaves will snap shut. We can kind of see this in the picture to the left, where some of the leaves underneath the inflorescence there, they look to have closed up and they're not as open as some of the leaves on the top. And finally, we're going to talk about thigmotropism, a plant's response to physical touch and contact, specifically in non-woody plants. You've definitely seen this in action if you've touched the leaves of the Mimosa pudica, better known as the touch-me-not plant. Within seconds of just a light tap to the leaves will snap shut. We can see this towards the bottom on the image to the left, whereas the leaves on the top, those are more open, so they haven't folded closed. If you're not familiar with this plant, you might be more familiar with the Venus flytrap. And when a bug lands between the leaf lobes, the trap will quickly close around the insect. These rapid movements that are part of thigmotropism, where a plant will change the way it's growing or its position in response to mechanical stimulation. There's actually a second type of thigmotropism, and this one is more structural. So we can see it in action usually in climbing vines, and these vines use the thigmotropism to grow around things like fences, poles, and as soon as something makes contact with these vines, the touch will trigger a growth response. And the cells on one side of the stem will start to grow faster than the cells on the other side. This causes the plant to twist and to curl around its support. It's kind of like the plant is giving itself a little bit of a hug. So, where do microtubules come into play? When the plant is touched, it sets off changes within the calcium levels, turgor pressure, which we'll talk about in a second, and of course, the microtubule arrangement. This changes helps the plant to rapidly alter internal structural supports and adjust how and where it will grow next. It's kind of like the plant is saying, hey, there's something here, better hold on to it. In species like vines, microtubules help redirect the construction of the cell walls to allow for the curling growth. In a more dynamic plant, where the leaves are going to close shut, it's not just the microtubules that change, but it's also things like water pressure, which is known as turgor pressure, that leads to these fast changes and allow these movements or for the leaves to appear to shut, much like a muscle or like a book closing. And this shows that different systems can work together to lead to plant motion. Some important research was done on thigmotropism during the early 20th century by the scientist Jagdish Chandra Bose from India. And Bose's research was found to be groundbreaking or to have groundbreaking information from the studies that were conducted on the plant responses to mechanical stimuli. These studies demonstrated that plants do have the ability to perceive and to respond to touch, and they will bend towards it or away from it. While his research was not originally recognized, it did challenge the view that plants were simply passive organisms, which was very common at the time. Bose described plants as having sensitivities and having responsiveness, which was similar to an animal's nervous system. So next time you brush against a vine, just remember it might be rearranging its internal scaffolding to hug you back. And here are the references. Thanks for listening.